Chile. Officially, the Republic of Chile is a country in western South America. It is the southernmost country in the world and the closest to Antarctica, stretching along a narrow strip of land between the Andes Mountains and the Pacific Ocean. Chile had a population of 17.5 million as of the latest census in 2017 and has a territorial area of 756,102 square kilometers, sharing borders with Peru to the north, Bolivia to the northeast, Argentina to the east, and the Drake Passage to the south. The country also controls several Pacific islands, including Juan Fernández, Isla Salas y Gómez, Desventuradas, and Easter Island, and claims about 1,250,000 square kilometers of Antarctica as the Chilean Antarctic territory. The capital and largest city of Chile is Santiago, and the national language is Spanish. Spain conquered and colonized the region in the mid-16th century, replacing Inca rule, but failed to conquer the independent Mapuche people who inhabited what is now south-central Chile. Chile emerged as a relatively stable authoritarian republic in the 1830s after their 1818 declaration of independence from Spain. During the 19th century, Chile experienced significant economic and territorial growth, putting an end to Mapuche resistance in the 1880s and gaining its current northern territory in the War of the Pacific by defeating Peru and Bolivia. In the 20th century, up until the 1970s, Chile underwent a process of democratization and experienced rapid population growth and urbanization, while relying increasingly on exports from copper mining to support its economy. During the 1960s and 1970s, the country was marked by severe left-right political polarization and turmoil, which culminated in the 1973 Chilean coup d'état that overthrew Salvador Allende's democratically elected left-wing government. This was followed by a 16-year right-wing military dictatorship under Augusto Pinochet, which resulted in more than 3,000 deaths or disappearances. The regime ended in 1990, following a referendum in 1988, and was succeeded by a center-left coalition, which ruled until 2010. Chile has a high-income economy and is one of the most economically and socially stable nations in South America, leading Latin America in competitiveness, per capita income, globalization, peace, and economic freedom. Chile also performs well in the region in terms of sustainability of the state and democratic development, and boasts the second lowest homicide rate in the Americas, following only Canada. Chile is a founding member of the United Nations, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, and the Pacific Alliance, and joined the OECD in 2010. History. Stone tool evidence indicates humans sporadically frequented the Monte Verde Valley area as long as 18,500 years ago. About 10,000 years ago, migrating indigenous peoples settled in fertile valleys and coastal areas of what is present-day Chile. Settlement sites from very early human habitation include Monte Verde, Cueva del Milodon and the Polyike crater's lava tube. The Incas briefly extended their empire into what is now northern Chile, but the Mapuche successfully resisted many attempts by the Inca Empire to subjugate them, despite their lack of state organization. They fought against the Sapa Inca Tupac Yupanqui and his army. The result of the bloody three-day confrontation known as the Battle of the Maule was that the Inca conquest of the territories of Chile ended at the Maule River. In 1520, while attempting to circumnavigate the globe, Ferdinand Magellan discovered the southern passage now named after him, thus becoming the first European to set foot on what is now Chile. The next Europeans to reach Chile were Diego de Almagro and his band of Spanish conquistadors, who came from Peru in 1535 seeking gold. The Spanish encountered various cultures that supported themselves principally through slash-and-burn agriculture and hunting. The conquest of Chile began in earnest in 1540 and was carried out by Pedro de Valdivia, one of Francisco Pizarro's lieutenants, who founded the city of Santiago on February 12, 1541. Although the Spanish did not find the extensive gold and silver they sought, they recognized the agricultural potential of Chile's Central Valley, and Chile became part of the Spanish Empire. Conquest took place gradually, and the Europeans suffered repeated setbacks. A massive Mapuche insurrection that began in 1553 resulted in Valdivia's death and the destruction of many of the colony's principal settlements. Subsequent major insurrections took place in 1598 and in 1655. Each time the Mapuche and other native groups revolted, the southern border of the colony was driven northward. The abolition of slavery by the Spanish crown in 1683 was done in recognition that enslaving the Mapuche intensified resistance rather than cowing them into submission. Despite royal prohibitions, relations remained strained from continual colonialist interference. Cut off to the north by desert, to the south by the Mapuche, to the east by the Andes Mountains, and to the west by the ocean, Chile became one of the most centralized, homogeneous territories in Spanish America. Serving as a sort of frontier garrison, the colony found itself with the mission of forestalling encroachment by both the Mapuche and Spain's European enemies, especially the English and the Dutch. Buccaneers and pirates menaced the colony in addition to the Mapuche, as was shown by Sir Francis Drake's 1578 raid on Valparaiso, the colony's principal port. Chile hosted one of the largest standing armies in the Americas, making it one of the most militarized of the Spanish possessions, as well as a drain on the treasury of the Viceroyalty of Peru. The first general census was conducted by the government of Agustín de Jauregui between 1777 and 1778. It indicated that the population consisted of 259,646 inhabitants, 73% of European descent, 8% mestizos, 9% indigenous peoples and 10% blacks. Francisco Hurtado, governor of the province of Chile, conducted a census in 1784 and found the population consisted of 26,703 inhabitants, 64% of whom were whites and 33% of whom were natives. The Diocese of Concepcion conducted a census in areas south of the Maule River in 1812, but did not include the indigenous population or the inhabitants of the province of Chile. The population is estimated at 210,567, 86% of whom were Spanish or of European descent, 10% of whom were indigenous and 4% of whom were mestizos, blacks and mulattoes. A 2021 study by Baton and Yurkajana shows that regions with a relatively high share of North European migrants developed faster in terms of numeracy, even if the overall number of migrants was small. This effect might be related to externalities. The surrounding population adopted a similar behavior as the small non-European immigrant group, and new schools were created. Ironically, there might have been positive spillover effects from the educational investment made by migrants. At the same time, numeracy might have been reduced by the greater inequality in these regions. However, the positive effects of immigration were apparently stronger. Independence and nation building. In 1808, Napoleon's enthronement of his brother Joseph as the Spanish king precipitated the drive by Chile for independence from Spain. A national junta in the name of Ferdinand, heir to the deposed king, was formed on September 18, 1810. The government junta of Chile proclaimed an autonomous government for Chile within the Spanish monarchy. In memory of this day, Chile celebrates its National Day on September 18 each year. After these events, a movement for total independence, under the command of José Miguel Carrera and his two brothers Juan José and Luis Carrera, soon gained a wider following. Spanish attempts to reimpose arbitrary rule during what was called the Reconquista led to a prolonged struggle, including infighting from Bernardo O'Higgins, who challenged Carrera's leadership. Intermittent warfare continued until 1817. With Carrera in prison in Argentina, O'Higgins, and anti-Carrera cohort José de San Martín, hero of the Argentine War of Independence, led an army that crossed the Andes into Chile and defeated the Royalists. On February 12, 1818, Chile was proclaimed an independent republic. The political revolt brought little social change, however, and 19th-century Chilean society preserved the essence of the stratified colonial social structure, which was greatly influenced by family politics and the Roman Catholic Church. A strong presidency eventually emerged, but wealthy landowners remained powerful. Bernardo O'Higgins once planned to expand Chile by liberating the Philippines from Spain and incorporating the islands. In this regard he tasked the Scottish naval officer, Lord Thomas Cochrane, in a letter dated November 12, 1821, expressing his plan to conquer Guayaquil, the Galapagos Islands, and the Philippines. There were preparations, but the plan did not push through because O'Higgins was exiled. Chile slowly started to expand its influence and to establish its borders. By the Tantaco Treaty, the archipelago of Chile was incorporated in 1826. The economy began to boom due to the discovery of silver ore in Chinarcillo, and the growing trade of the port of Valparaiso, which led to conflict over maritime supremacy in the Pacific with Peru. At the same time, attempts were made to strengthen sovereignty in southern Chile, intensifying penetration into Araucania and colonizing Llanquihue with German immigrants in 1848. Through the founding of Fort Bolnes by the schooner and cut under the command of John Williams Wilson, the Magallanes region started to be controlled by country in 1843, while the Antofagasta region, at the time in dispute with Bolivia, began to fill with people. After the Chilean Civil War of 1829 to 1830, in which the conservatives won, under the Joaquim Prieto administration, the Chilean Constitution of 1833 was written and put into effect with high influence from the triple minister Diego Portales. Two other civil wars happened in Chile in the 1850s, one in 1851 and the other one in 1859. Toward the end of the 19th century, the government in Santiago consolidated its position in the south by the occupation of Araucania. The Boundary Treaty of 1881 between Chile and Argentina confirmed Chilean sovereignty over the Strait of Magellan, but also made the country to renounce to its claims in the rest of East Patagonia after a dispute that started in 1842. As a result of the War of the Pacific with Peru and Bolivia, Chile expanded its territory northward by almost one-third, eliminating Bolivia's access to the Pacific, and acquired valuable nitrate deposits, the exploitation of which led to an era of national affluence. Chile had joined the stand as one of the high-income countries in South America by 1870. On September 9, 1888, Chile took possession of Easter Island by the signing of a mutual will agreement with the local king, thanks to the efforts of the Bishop of Tahiti, Monsignor José María Verdier, since the island was constantly attacked by slave merchants. The naval officer Policarpo Toro represented the Chilean government and Adamutekena was the head of the Council of Rapa Nui. The Rapa Nui elders ceded sovereignty, without renouncing their titles as chiefs, the ownership of their lands, the validity of their culture and traditions, and on equal terms. The Rapa Nui sold nothing, they were integrated in equal conditions to Chile. The 1891 Chilean Civil War brought about a redistribution of power between the President and Congress, and Chile established a parliamentary-style democracy. However, the Civil War had also been a contest between those who favored the development of local industries and powerful Chilean banking interests, particularly the House of Edwards, which had strong ties to foreign investors. Soon after, the country engaged in a vastly expensive naval arms race with Argentina that nearly led to war, as well because of the Puna de Atacama dispute. After the War of the Pacific, Chile became a naval power in the Americas, even sending a ship in protests in the Panama Crisis of 1885 against the United States intervention in the then Colombian territory. The United States and Chile had the Baltimore Crisis, which almost became a war as Chile was a potential threat to the intentions of hegemony from the United States in the Western Hemisphere. 20th century. The Chilean economy partially degenerated into a system protecting the interests of a ruling oligarchy. By the 1920s, the emerging middle and working classes were powerful enough to elect a reformist president, Arturo Alessandri, whose program was frustrated by a conservative Congress. In the 1920s, Marxist groups with strong popular support arose. A military coup led by General Luis Altamirano in 1924 set off a period of political instability that lasted until 1932. Of the 10 governments that held power in that period, the longest lasting was that of General Carlos Ibáñez del Campo, who briefly held power in 1925 and then again between 1927 and 1931 in what was a de facto dictatorship, although not really comparable in harshness or corruption to the type of military dictatorship that have often bedeviled the rest of Latin America. By relinquishing power to a democratically elected successor, Ibáñez del Campo retained the respect of a large enough segment of the population to remain a viable politician for more than 30 years, in spite of the vague and shifting nature of his ideology. When constitutional rule was restored in 1932, a strong middle-class party, the Radicals, emerged. It became the key force in coalition governments for the next 20 years. During the period of radical party dominance, the state increased its role in the economy. In 1952, voters returned Ibáñez del Campo to office for another 6 years. Jorge Alessandri succeeded Ibáñez del Campo in 1958, bringing Chilean conservatism back into power democratically for another term. The 1964 presidential election of Christian Democrat Eduardo Fremont Alva by an absolute majority initiated a period of major reform. Under the slogan Revolution in Liberty, the Free administration embarked on far-reaching social and economic programs, particularly in education, housing, and agrarian reform, including rural unionization of agricultural workers. By 1967, however, Free encountered increasing opposition from leftists, who charged that his reforms were inadequate, and from conservatives, who found them excessive. At the end of his term, Free had not fully achieved his party's ambitious goals. In the 1970 election, Senator Salvador Allende of the Socialist Party of Chile, then part of the Popular Unity Coalition, which included the Communists, Radicals, Social Democrats, Dissident Christian Democrats, the Popular Unitary Action Movement, and the Independent Popular Action, achieved a partial majority in a plurality of votes in a three-way contest, followed by candidates Radomiro Tomic for the Christian Democrat Party and Jorge Alessandri for the Conservative Party. Allende was not elected with an absolute majority, receiving fewer than 35% of the votes. The Chilean Congress conducted a runoff vote between the leading candidates, Allende and former President Jorge Alessandri, and, keeping with tradition, chose Allende by a vote of 153 to 35. Free refused to form an alliance with Alessandri to oppose Allende, on the grounds that the Christian Democrats were a workers' party and could not make common cause with the right wing. An economic depression that began in 1972 was exacerbated by capital flight, plummeting private investment, and withdrawal of bank deposits in response to Allende's socialist program. Production fell and unemployment rose. Allende adopted measures including price freezes, wage increases, and tax reforms, to increase consumer spending and redistribute income downward. Joint public-private public works projects helped reduce unemployment. much of the banking sector was nationalized. Many enterprises within the copper, coal, iron, nitrate, and steel industries were expropriated, nationalized, or subjected to state intervention. Industrial output increased sharply and unemployment fell during the Allende administration's first year. Allende's program included advancement of workers' interests, replacing the judicial system with socialist legality, nationalization of banks and forcing others to bankruptcy, and strengthening popular militias known as MIR. Started under former President Free, the Popular Unity Platform also called for nationalization of Chile's major copper mines in the form of a constitutional amendment. The measure was passed unanimously by Congress. As a result, the Richard Nixon administration organized and inserted secret operatives in Chile, in order to swiftly destabilize Allende's government. In addition, U.S. financial pressure restricted international economic credit to Chile. The economic problems were also exacerbated by Allende's public spending, financed mostly through printing money, and by poor credit ratings given by commercial banks. Simultaneously, opposition media, politicians, business guilds and other organizations helped to accelerate a campaign of domestic political and economical destabilization, some of which was backed by the United States. By early 1973, inflation was out of control. On May 26, 1973, Chile's Supreme Court, which was opposed to Allende's government, unanimously denounced Allende's disruption of the legality of the nation. Although illegal under the Chilean constitution, the court supported and strengthened Pinochet's soon-to-be seizure of power. Pinochet era. A military coup overthrew Allende on September 11, 1973. As the armed forces bombarded the presidential palace, Allende apparently committed suicide. After the coup, Henry Kissinger told U.S. President Richard Nixon that the United States had helped the coup. In 1970, when Allende was first elected, Henry Kissinger had stated, "I don't see why we need to stand by and watch a country go communist due to the irresponsibility of its own people." A military junta, led by General Augusto Pinochet, took control of the country. The years of the regime were marked by human rights violations. Chile actively participated in Operation Condor. In October 1973, at least 72 people were murdered by the Caravan of Death. According to the Rettig Report and Valish Commission, at least 2,115 were killed, and at least 27,265 were tortured, including 88 children younger than 12 years old. In 2011, Chile recognized an additional 9,800 victims, bringing the total number of killed, tortured, or imprisoned for political reasons to 40,018. At the National Stadium, filled with detainees, one of those tortured and killed was internationally known poet-singer Victor Jara. A new constitution was approved by a controversial plebiscite on September 11, 1980, and General Pinochet became president of the Republic for an 8-year term. After Pinochet obtained rule of the country, several hundred committed Chilean revolutionaries joined the Sandinista army in Nicaragua, guerrilla forces in Argentina, or training camps in Cuba, Eastern Europe, and Northern Africa. In the late 1980s, largely as a result of events such as the 1982 economic collapse and mass civil resistance in 1983–88, the government gradually permitted greater freedom of assembly, speech, and association, to include trade union and political activity. The government launched market-oriented reforms with Hernan Bucci as Minister of Finance. Chile moved toward a free market economy that saw an increase in domestic and foreign private investment, although the copper industry and other important mineral resources were not open to competition. In a plebiscite on October 5, 1988, Pinochet was denied a second 8-year term as president. Chileans elected a new president and the majority of members of a bicameral Congress on December 14, 1989. Christian Democrat Patricio Aylwin, the candidate of a coalition of 17 political parties called the Concertation, received an absolute majority of votes. President Aylwin served from 1990 to 1994, in what was considered a transition period. 21st century. In December 1993, Christian Democrat Eduardo Frei Ruiz-Tagle, the son of previous President Eduardo Frei Montalva, led the Concertation coalition to victory with an absolute majority of votes. Frei Ruiz-Tagle was succeeded in 2000 by socialist Ricardo Lagos, who won the presidency in an unprecedented runoff election against Joaquim Lavín of the Rightist Alliance for Chile. In January 2006, Chileans elected their first female president, Michelle Bachelet Gerria, of the Socialist Party, defeating Sebastián Piñera, of the National Renewal Party, extending the Concertation governance for another 4 years. In January 2010, Chileans elected Sebastián Piñera as the first rightist president in 20 years, defeating former President Eduardo Frei Ruiz-Tagle of the Concertation, for a 4-year term succeeding Bachelet. Due to term limits, Sebastián Piñera did not stand for re-election in 2013, and his term expired in March 2014, resulting in Michelle Bachelet returning to office. Sebastián Piñera succeeded Bachelet again in 2018 as the President of Chile after winning the December 2017 presidential election. On February 27, 2010, Chile was struck by an 8.8 MW earthquake, the fifth largest ever recorded at the time. More than 500 people died and over 1 million people lost their homes. The earthquake was also followed by multiple aftershocks. Initial damage estimates were in the range of $15 to $30 billion, around 10% to 15% of Chile's real gross domestic product. Chile achieved global recognition for the successful rescue of 33 trapped miners in 2010. On August 5, 2010, the access tunnel collapsed at the San Jose copper and gold mine in the Atacama Desert near Copiapó in northern Chile, trapping 33 men 700 meters below ground. A rescue effort organized by the Chilean government located the miners 17 days later. All 33 men were brought to the surface 2 months later on October 13, 2010, over a period of almost 24 hours, an effort that was carried on live television around the world. 2019 to 20 Chilean protests are a series of countrywide protests in response to a rise in the Santiago Metro's subway fare, the increased cost of living, privatization, and inequality prevalent in the country. On November 15, most of the political parties represented in the National Congress signed an agreement to call a national referendum in April 2020 regarding the creation of a new constitution, later postponed to October due to the COVID-19 pandemic. On October 25, 2020, Chileans voted 78.28% in favor of a new constitution, while 21.72% rejected the change. Voter turnout was 51%. An election for the members of the Constitutional Convention was held in Chile between 15 and May 16, 2021. On December 19, 2021, a leftist candidate, the 35-year-old former student protest leader Gabriel Boric, won Chile's presidential election to become the country's youngest ever leader. On March 11, 2022, Boric was sworn in as president to succeed outgoing President Sebastián Piñera. Out of 24 members of Gabriel Boric's female majority cabinet, 14 are women. On September 4, 2022, voters rejected the new constitution proposal in the constitutional referendum, which was put forward by the left-leaning Constitutional Convention. On December 17, 2023, voters rejected a second new constitution proposal in a new constitutional referendum, written by the conservative-led Constitutional Council. Government and politics. The current Constitution of Chile was drafted by Jaime Guzmán in 1980 and subsequently approved via a national plebiscite regarded as highly irregular by some observers in September of that year, under the military dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet. It entered into force in March 1981. After Pinochet's defeat in the 1988 plebiscite, the Constitution was amended to ease provisions for future amendments to the Constitution. In September 2005, President Ricardo Lagos signed into law several constitutional amendments passed by Congress. These include eliminating the positions of appointed senators and senators for life, granting the president authority to remove the commanders-in-chief of the armed forces, and reducing the presidential term from 6 to 4 years. Chile's judiciary is independent and includes a court of appeal, a system of military courts, a constitutional tribunal, and the Supreme Court of Chile. In June 2005, Chile completed a nationwide overhaul of its criminal justice system. The reform has replaced inquisitorial proceedings with an adversarial system with greater similarity to that of common law jurisdictions such as the United States. For parliamentary elections, between 1989 and 2013 the binominal system was used, which promoted the establishment of two majority political blocs, concertation and alliance, at the expense of the exclusion of non-majority political groups. The opponents of this system approved in 2015 a moderate proportional electoral system that has been in force since the 2017 parliamentary elections, allowing the entry of new parties and coalitions. The Congress of Chile has a 50-seat Senate and a 155-member Chamber of Deputies. Senators serve for 8 years with staggered terms, while deputies are elected every 4 years. The last congressional elections were held on November 21, 2021, concurrently with the presidential election. The Congress is located in the port city of Valparaiso, about 140 kilometers west of the capital, Santiago. The main existing political coalitions in Chile are, in the National Congress, Chile Vamos has 52 deputies and 24 senators, while the parliamentary group of Apruebo Dignidad is formed by 37 deputies and 6 senators. Democratic Socialism is the third political force with 30 deputies and 13 senators. The other groups with parliamentary representation are the Republican Party, the Christian Democratic Party, the Party of the People, and the Independents outside of a coalition. Foreign relations. Since the early decades after independence, Chile has always had an active involvement in foreign affairs. In 1837, the country aggressively challenged the dominance of Peru's port of Callao for preeminence in the Pacific trade routes, defeating the short-lived alliance between Peru and Bolivia, the Peru-Bolivian Confederation, in the War of the Confederation. The war dissolved the Confederation while distributing power in the Pacific. A second international war, the War of the Pacific, further increased Chile's regional role, while adding considerably to its territory. During the 19th century, Chile's commercial ties were primarily with Britain, a nation that had a major influence on the formation of the Chilean Navy. The French influenced Chile's legal and educational systems and had a decisive impact on Chile, through the architecture of the capital in the boom years at the turn of the 20th century. German influence came from the organization and training of the army by Prussians. On June 26, 1945, Chile participated as a founding member of the United Nations, being among 50 countries that signed the United Nations Charter in San Francisco, California. With the military coup of 1973, Chile became isolated politically as a result of widespread human rights abuses. Since its return to democracy in 1990, Chile has been an active participant in the international political arena. Chile completed a 2-year non-permanent position on the UN Security Council in January 2005. José Miguel Insulza, a Chilean national, was elected Secretary General of the Organization of American States in May 2005 and confirmed in his position, being re-elected in 2009. Chile is currently serving on the International Atomic Energy Agency Board of Governors, and the 2007 to 2008 chair of the board is Chile's ambassador to the IAEA, Milenko Skoknik. The country is an active member of the UN family of agencies and participates in UN peacekeeping activities. It was re-elected as a member of the UN Human Rights Council in 2011 for a 3-year term. It was also elected to one of 5 non-permanent seats on the UN Security Council in 2013. Chile hosted the Defense Ministerial of the Americas in 2002 and the APEC Summit and related meetings in 2004. It also hosted the Community of Democracies Ministerial in April 2005 and the Ibero-American Summit in November 2007. An associate member of Mercosur and a full member of APEC, Chile has been a major player in international economic issues and hemispheric free trade. Economy. The Central Bank of Chile in Santiago serves as the central bank for the country. The Chilean currency is the Chilean peso. Chile is one of South America's most stable and prosperous nations, leading Latin American nations in human development, competitiveness, globalization, economic freedom, and low perception of corruption. Since July 2013, Chile is considered by the World Bank as a high-income economy. The think tank The Heritage Foundation states that Chile has the highest degree of economic freedom in South America, owing to its independent and efficient judicial system and prudent public finance management. In May 2010, Chile became the first South American country to join the OECD. In 2006, Chile became the country with the highest nominal GDP per capita in Latin America. As of 2020, Chile ranks third in Latin America behind Uruguay and Panama in nominal GDP per capita. Copper mining makes up 20% of Chilean GDP and 60% of exports. Escondida is the largest copper mine in the world, producing over 5% of global supplies. Overall, Chile produces a third of the world's copper. Codelco, the state mining firm, competes with private copper mining companies. Sound economic policies, maintained consistently since the 1980s, have contributed to steady economic growth in Chile and have more than halved poverty rates. Chile began to experience a moderate economic downturn in 1999. The economy remained sluggish until 2003, when it began to show clear signs of recovery, achieving 4% GDP growth. The Chilean economy finished 2004 with growth of 6%. Real GDP growth reached 6% in 2005 before falling back to 4% in 2006. GDP expanded by 5% in 2007. Faced with the financial crisis of 2007 to 2008, the government announced an economic stimulus plan to spur employment and growth, and despite the Great Recession, aimed for an expansion of between 2% and 3% of GDP for 2009. Nonetheless, economic analysts disagreed with government estimates and predicted economic growth at a median of 1.5%. Real GDP growth in 2012 was 5.5%. Growth slowed to 4% in the first quarter of 2013. The unemployment rate was 8% in 2022, according to the World Bank. There are reported labor shortages in agriculture, mining, and construction. The percentage of Chileans with per capita household incomes below the poverty line defined as twice the cost of satisfying a person's minimal nutritional needs fell from 45% in 1987 to 11.5% in 2009, according to government surveys. Critics in Chile, however, argue that true poverty figures are considerably higher than those officially published. Using the relative yardstick favored in many European countries, 27% of Chileans would be poor, according to Juan Carlos Furs of the ECLAC. As of November 2012, about 11.1 million people benefit from government welfare programs, via the Social Protection Card, which includes the population living in poverty and those at a risk of falling into poverty. The privatized national pension system has encouraged domestic investment and contributed to an estimated total domestic savings rate of approximately 21% of GDP. Under the compulsory private pension system, most formal sector employees pay 10% of their salaries into privately managed funds. Chile has signed free trade agreements with a whole network of countries, including an FTA with the United States that was signed in 2003 and implemented in January 2004. Internal government of Chile figures show that even when factoring out inflation and the recent high price of copper, bilateral trade between the US and Chile has grown over 60% since then. Chile's total trade with China reached US $9 billion in 2006, representing nearly 66% of the value of its trade relationship with Asia. Exports to Asia increased from US $15 billion in 2005 to US $20 billion in 2006, a 30% increase. Year-on-year growth of imports was especially strong from a number of countries: Ecuador, Thailand, South Korea, and China. Chile's approach to foreign direct investment is codified in the country's foreign investment law. Registration is reported to be simple and transparent, and foreign investors are guaranteed access to the official foreign exchange market to repatriate their profits and capital. The Chilean government has formed a Council on Innovation and Competition, hoping to bring in additional FDI to new parts of the economy. Standard & Poor's gives Chile a credit rating of A. The government of Chile continues to pay down its foreign debt, with public debt only 4% of GDP at the end of 2006. The Chilean central government is a net creditor with a net asset position of 7% of GDP at end 2012. The current account deficit was 4% in the first quarter of 2013, financed mostly by foreign direct investment. 14% of central government revenue came directly from copper in 2012. Chile was ranked 52nd in the Global Innovation Index in 2023. Religion. As of 2012, 66% of Chilean population over 15 years of age claimed to adhere to the Roman Catholic Church, a decrease from the 70% reported in the 2002 census. In the same census of 2012, 17% of Chileans reported adherence to an evangelical church. Approximately 90% of evangelical Christians are Pentecostal. But Wesleyan, Lutheran, Anglican, Episcopalian, Presbyterian, other Reformed, Baptist, and Methodist churches also are present amongst Chilean evangelical churches. Irreligious people, atheists, and agnostics account for around 12% of the population. By 2015, the major religion in Chile remained Christianity, with an estimated 55% of Chileans belonging to the Roman Catholic Church, 13% to various evangelical churches, and just 7% adhering to any other religion. Agnostics and atheists were estimated at 25% of the population. Chile has a Baha'i religious community, and is home to the Baha'i Mother Temple, or Continental House of Worship, for Latin America. Completed in 2016, It serves as a space for people of all religions and backgrounds to gather, meditate, reflect, and worship. It is formed from cast glass and translucent marble and has been described as innovative in its architectural style. The Constitution guarantees the right to freedom of religion, and other laws and policies contribute to generally free religious practice. The law at all levels fully protects this right against abuse by either governmental or private actors. Church and state are officially separate in Chile. A 1999 law on religion prohibits religious discrimination. However, the Roman Catholic Church for mostly historical and social reasons enjoys a privileged status and occasionally receives preferential treatment. Government officials attend Roman Catholic events as well as major evangelical and Jewish ceremonies. The Chilean government treats the religious holidays of Christmas, Good Friday, the Feast of the Virgin of Carmen, the Feast of Saints Peter and Paul, the Feast of the Assumption, All Saints' Day, and the Feast of the Immaculate Conception as national holidays. Recently, the government declared October 31st, Reformation Day, to be an additional national holiday, in honor of the evangelical churches of the country. The patron saints of Chile are Our Lady of Mount Carmel and Saint James the Greater. In 2005, Pope Benedict XVI canonized Alberto Hurtado, who became the country's second native Roman Catholic saint after Teresa de los Andes. Languages. The Spanish spoken in Chile is distinctively accented and quite unlike that of neighboring South American countries because final syllables are often dropped, and some consonants have a soft pronunciation. Accent varies only very slightly from north to south. More noticeable are the differences in accent based on social class or whether one lives in the city or the country. That the Chilean population was largely formed in a small section at the center of the country and then migrated in modest numbers to the north and south helps explain this relative lack of differentiation, which was maintained by the national reach of radio, and now television, which also helps to diffuse and homogenize colloquial expressions. There are several indigenous languages spoken in Chile: Mapudungun, Aymara, Rapa Nui, Chilean Sign Language and Kawaskur and Yagan, along with non-indigenous German, Italian, English, Greek and Quechua. After the Spanish conquest, Spanish took over as the lingua franca and the indigenous languages have become minority languages, with some now extinct or close to extinction. German is still spoken to some extent in southern Chile, either in small countryside pockets or as a second language among the communities of larger cities. Through initiatives such as the English Opens Doors program, the government made English mandatory for students in 5th grade and above in public schools. Most private schools in Chile start teaching English from kindergarten. Common English words have been absorbed and appropriated into everyday Spanish speech. Culture. From the period between early agricultural settlements and up to the late pre-Columbian period, northern Chile was a region of Andean culture that was influenced by Altiplano traditions spreading to the coastal valleys of the north, while southern regions were areas of Mapuche cultural activities. Throughout the colonial period following the conquest, and during the early Republican period, the country's culture was dominated by the Spanish. Other European influences, primarily English, French, and German began in the 19th century and have continued to this day. German migrants influenced the Bavarian-style rural architecture and cuisine in the south of Chile in cities such as Valdivia, Frutillar, Porto Varas, Osorno, Temuco, Porto Octi, Lanquihue, Fajamazan, Petrofcan, Victoria, Pucón and Porto Montt.